The room was packed. Executives lined the front row, their polished shoes reflecting the overhead lights. My colleagues sat in the middle rows, whispering among themselves, notebooks open, pens ready. The energy buzzed with that sharp edge that only comes when everyone knows something important is about to happen. It was my turn to present. I had worked for weeks preparing for this meeting. Late nights, early mornings, countless drafts of slides. Every number checked, every word rehearsed. This was supposed to be my moment. The project I had nurtured, the one I had poured myself into, was finally ready to be unveiled. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and walked to the front of the room. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. I clicked the first slide. "Good morning, everyone. Today I'll be presenting..." And then it happened. Before I could finish the sentence, my boss leaned forward in his chair, cut across my words, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You don't belong here." The room went silent. It wasn't a whisper, not a mutter under his breath. It was deliberate, sharp, a knife thrown in front of everyone. I froze, heat rushing to my face. My mouth went dry. The clicker trembled in my hand. I looked at him, hoping it was some kind of sick joke, but his expression told me otherwise. His eyes were cold, his jaw set, his lips curled into the faintest smirk. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted everyone else in the room to see me as small. And it worked. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone coughed to break the silence. My colleagues avoided my eyes. In that moment, I was no longer a professional presenting my work. I was an outsider, exposed, humiliated. My boss leaned back, satisfied, and said casually, "Let's move on." But I couldn't move on. Those words echoed inside me like thunder. "You don't belong here." Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you." And in that moment, my boss tried to tell me who I was. An imposter, an outsider, someone unworthy of standing in that room. For a split second, I believed him. My hands shook, my chest tightened. I wanted to run, to disappear, to melt into the floor and never come back. My mind screamed, "He's right. I don't belong here." But another voice, quiet, fragile, buried deep inside me, whispered something else. What if he's wrong? What if this moment isn't the end, but the beginning? After the meeting ended, I packed up my things slowly, trying to keep my face neutral while inside I was crumbling. No one looked at me, no one said a word. The humiliation clung to me like a second skin. When I got home that night, I collapsed onto my bed, staring at the ceiling, his words playing on a loop. "You don't belong here." I thought of every time I'd been told something similar before. Teachers who doubted me, family members who dismissed me, friends who laughed at my dreams, and now my own boss, confirming the fear I had carried for years. Maybe they were all right. Maybe I really didn't belong anywhere. Tears slipped down my cheeks. My chest ached. I felt like a fraud, a mistake, a failure. But in the middle of that pain, I made a quiet promise to myself. One day I will stand in that room again. And this time, I will not shrink. This time, I will not break. This time, I will change the room. Let me ask you, have you ever been told you don't belong? At work, at school, even in your own family? Have you ever had someone in power speak words so cruel that they burrowed into your soul? If you have, then you know how it feels, like the ground disappears beneath you, like the air is sucked out of your lungs. But you also know this. Sometimes those words become the very fire that pushes you to rise. That night, as I wiped my tears, I realized something important. My boss's words weren't the truth. They were a mirror of his own fear. And I decided I wouldn't let his fear define my future. Because I did belong, and one day soon, I would prove it. Humiliation doesn't always come in the form of shouting. Sometimes it comes in a single sentence, spoken in front of the wrong audience. And my boss had mastered that art. After the meeting, his words followed me everywhere. At my desk, when colleagues walked past without making eye contact, I heard it again. You don't belong here. In the cafeteria, when laughter bubbled at a nearby table, I wondered if it was about me. You don't belong here. At home, when I stared at my reflection in the mirror, exhausted, drained, I whispered it myself. You don't belong here. Those 4 words became a chain around my neck. I began to doubt everything. Was my work really valuable? Had I been fooling myself the whole time? Did everyone secretly agree with him and just not have the courage to say it? Every mistake, no matter how small, felt like proof that he was right. A typo in an email? Proof. A nervous stutter in a meeting? Proof. A forgotten detail? Proof. I started staying later, working harder, trying desperately to erase any flaw he could point to. But no matter what I did, the echo of his words drowned out my effort. And worse, he seemed to enjoy it. In the weeks that followed, he found subtle ways to reinforce the humiliation. When I raised my hand in meetings, let's hear from someone else. When I submitted reports, double-check this, you make mistakes. When others spoke, great point. But when I spoke, silence. It wasn't just what he said, it was what he didn't say. The lack of acknowledgement, the dismissal, the void where support should have been. And soon, my colleagues followed his lead. They mirrored his behavior not out of malice, but out of survival. If the boss disrespected me, why should they risk respecting me? Carl Jung once said, shame is a soul-eating emotion. And that's what I felt. Shame eating away at me piece by piece. The shame of being silenced, the shame of being invisible, the shame of being told in front of everyone that I didn't belong. I carried it like a second skin. Nights became the hardest. I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word, every glance, every laugh that wasn't meant for me. I wondered if I should quit, if I should save myself the pain and walk away. But then, another voice whispered, soft at first, but growing louder each night. What if this isn't the end? What if this is the beginning of your fight? The breaking point came when I almost handed in my resignation letter. I had typed it out. It sat open on my computer, cursor blinking at the bottom of the page. My finger hovered over the print button. And then I stopped. I thought about all the nights I had sacrificed, all the work I had poured into this place, all the dreams I had of building a career, a name, a future. Would I really let his words erase all of that? Or could I take those very words and turn them into fuel? That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't quit. I wouldn't let his voice be the last one I heard, because if he said I didn't belong, then I would prove that I did. Not just by existing in the room, but by changing it. Let me ask you, have you ever been in a place where someone's words made you feel so small you wanted to disappear? And then, instead of disappearing, you decided to rise? If you have, you know that moment of shift, that spark of rebellion, that quiet fire that says, I will not be erased. That's what I felt. And from that moment on, I stopped letting his words define me. I began preparing, not to prove myself to him, but to prove myself to me, because deep down, I already belonged. I just needed to take the stage and show it. The invitation came unexpectedly. It was a month after the humiliation. I was at my desk, head down, drowning in work, when an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, Keynote Opportunity, Upcoming Industry Conference. I blinked at the screen. Surely it wasn't for me. But it was. One of the organizers had seen my work, had heard about the project I had been developing, the very one my boss tried to shut down, and wanted me to present it, not just to my team, not just to my department, but to the entire industry, on stage, in front of hundreds. My heart skipped, then it pounded, then it sank, because the first thought that came to my mind wasn't, yes, I can. It was his voice. You don't belong here. For days I wrestled with the decision. Part of me wanted to decline, to avoid the risk of failing publicly. After all, if my boss could humiliate me in a small room, what would happen in front of hundreds? What if I froze? What if I stuttered? What if everyone saw that he was right? But another part of me, the part that had begun whispering rebellion, refused to let fear win. This wasn't just a presentation. It was a chance. A stage not controlled by him, a platform where his voice couldn't silence mine. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I said yes, and from that moment preparation became my life. I studied everything I could. I refined my slides until they were clear and sharp. I practiced my words until they flowed like water. I stood in front of mirrors, recording myself, listening, adjusting, growing stronger with each run. But no amount of preparation erased the fear. Every night, as I rehearsed, his words haunted me. "You don't belong here." And every night I answered back, "Watch me." Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." That became my mantra. I wasn't the humiliated employee he tried to make me. I wasn't the silence he forced on me. I wasn't the shame he projected onto me. I was what I chose to become, and I chose to become someone who would take the stage. The days before the conference were brutal. My hands shook every time I thought about it. My stomach churned. I dreamed of standing on stage and forgetting every word. But beneath the fear was something else. Fire. Because for the first time, I wasn't preparing to prove myself to him. I wasn't preparing to silence his voice. I was preparing to amplify mine. The morning of the conference, I stood backstage, my notes in hand, my heart racing so loudly I thought it would burst. I could hear the murmur of the audience, the shuffling of papers, the clinking of glasses. The room was alive, waiting. My boss was there too, front row. I had seen him earlier, shaking hands, smiling that same smirk. When our eyes met, I saw it again. That flicker of doubt, that silent message, "You don't belong here," and for the first time I didn't shrink. I let his words fuel me, not cage me. Because in a few minutes I would walk onto that stage, and I would change the room. Let me ask you, have you ever stood on the edge of something terrifying, heart-pounding, knees weak, but knowing deep down it was the moment that could define you? That's where I was, and as I waited for my name to be called, I whispered to myself, "I belong. I always did." And then the lights shifted. The announcer spoke. My name echoed through the room. It was time. The spotlight was blinding. As I stepped onto the stage, the room seemed to stretch endlessly. Rows and rows of faces stared back at me. Executives, colleagues, strangers from across the industry. Their murmurs faded as the announcer's voice echoed my name. My feet felt heavy, my palms slick with sweat, but I forced myself to walk steadily to the podium. For a heartbeat, the silence was suffocating, and then, like a shadow creeping into my mind, I heard it again. "You don't belong here." His voice, sharp and cruel, replayed inside my head. I glanced toward the front row. There he was, my boss, arms crossed, leaning back in his chair, smirk painted across his face, waiting for me to stumble, waiting for me to fail, waiting to be proven right. My chest tightened, my throat threatened to close. For a terrifying second, I thought I wouldn't be able to speak, but then I remembered the late nights, the long hours, the work no one else had done, the sacrifices I had made, the quiet fire that grew in me after every humiliation. I belonged. Not because he said so, not because the room believed it, but because I had earned this moment. I took a deep breath, and I began. At first my voice trembled. The words caught, my hands shook against the podium. A few people in the audience shifted, glancing at each other, as if they could see the nerves, but then something shifted. I looked up. I locked eyes with someone in the middle row, an older woman, pen in hand, watching me intently. She nodded just slightly, as if to say, "Go on, we're listening." So I did. The more I spoke, the steadier I became. My voice grew stronger, my words clearer. I stepped away from the podium, gesturing freely, letting my passion carry me. The data I had studied, the solutions I had designed, the vision I had nurtured, it all flowed out of me like a river finally breaking through a dam. And the room changed. The whispers stopped. The shifting chairs stilled. Faces leaned forward. Pens paused mid-sentence. They weren't just hearing me, they were with me. Even my boss's smirk faded. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And on that stage I became, not the humiliated employee, not the outsider, not the person silenced in meetings. I became the voice that filled the room. The turning point came halfway through my talk. I told a story, personal, raw, about the challenges I faced during the project. I admitted the doubts, the mistakes, the late nights when I thought I'd fail. And then I shared the breakthrough, the solution that had changed everything. The audience reacted, not with laughter, not with dismissal, but with nods, murmurs of agreement, even applause. Applause. In the middle of my presentation, the sound washed over me like a wave, steadying my heart, sharpening my focus. For the first time, I wasn't just speaking, I was connecting. By the time I reached the end, my fear was gone. I stood tall, my voice clear, my heart strong, as I delivered the final line. Belonging is not something you're given, it's something you claim. And today, I claim it. The room erupted. Applause thundered. People rose to their feet, hands clapping, voices cheering. And in that moment, the shame that had haunted me dissolved because I had changed the room. I glanced at the front row. My boss sat stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on me with something he had never shown before. Not approval, not kindness, respect. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to, because the silence spoke louder than anything. I had proven him wrong. Let me ask you, have you ever had that moment when everything turned? When fear became fire, when doubt became strength, when silence became applause? That was my moment. And from then on, no matter what anyone said, no matter how many times someone tried to tell me I didn't belong, I knew the truth. I had taken the stage, and I had changed the room. When the applause finally faded, I stepped off the stage with my heart still pounding. My hands trembled, but not with fear this time, with power. The kind of power that comes when you faced the voice that told you you don't belong, and answered it with action. Colleagues I barely knew stopped me in the hallway to shake my hand. Strangers congratulated me, saying my words had inspired them. People who had once ignored me now looked at me with admiration, respect, even awe. And then there was him, my boss. He approached slowly, his face unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might dismiss me again, cut me down like before. But instead, he nodded stiffly and muttered, "Good job." It wasn't warm, it wasn't gracious, but it was enough. Because for the first time, he couldn't deny me. He couldn't erase what the room had witnessed. I had changed it. The weeks that followed were different. I wasn't invisible anymore. In meetings, people leaned in when I spoke. My ideas were taken seriously. My name was mentioned in conversations I wasn't even part of. Doors that had always been closed to me began to open. And my boss? He never repeated those words again. Maybe he learned, maybe he didn't. But either way, I didn't care. Because I had already proven, to him, to the room, but most importantly to myself, that I belonged. Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you." My boss tried to tell me who I was. He tried to make me believe I was an outsider, a mistake, someone who didn't deserve to stand in that room. But on that stage, I answered the question for myself. I knew who I was. And once you know who you are, no one can tell you otherwise. Let me ask you one last time. Have you ever been told you didn't belong? And have you ever found the courage to stay, to speak, to rise anyway? If you have, then you know the truth I discovered. Belonging is not permission. Belonging is presence. Belonging is courage. Belonging is when you stand tall and say, this is who I am, and this is my place. So yes, my boss said I didn't belong, but I took the stage, I spoke my truth, and I changed the room. And in doing so, I changed myself. Tell me in the comments, when was the moment you proved you belonged, even when someone told you otherwise? Subscribe for more emotional stories of humiliation, healing, and transformation. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your voice matters, and it can change the room. And I'll leave you with Jung's words, one final time. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And on that stage, I became.